Good afternoon. Good afternoon. I hope you are all fine. I hope you are enjoying day two of after COVID or after the COVID lockdown. I know that we have a few restrictions here and there, but hopefully it is not going too badly for all of you out there. I hope you are learning to pick a few pieces and that you will handle very well, that we shall all handle, that we shall all manage in this season. Right. So I'm once again excited to be here. I'm excited to share something that has been on my heart for a while. I was debating whether to talk about this or talk about something else. And then I received a WhatsApp message from one of my friends who was actually I call not even a friend. I'll call them a mentee who said, "Hey, when are you need to write down a message to young boys or young men out there. Write a message to them and encourage them. Many have become desperate in this season, many are suicidal." And so I was like, okay, I think this is the message that the Lord wants me to share, and I'm excited to share this message with all of you. Let us just pray. Almighty God, I come to you in obedience, Lord. I pray that you will use me as your vessel in this season, in this time, and as we share with the people listening out there, Lord, may you give us the words. May you use my mouth and my brain and whatever I have to the glory of your holy name. In Jesus' name. Amen. So welcome Gladys, welcome Daniel, Diana Komunda, welcome. It is good to see you here, and I think since the work week has begun, it may not be easy to tell who will make this lunchtime meeting, but we will go on nonetheless. So I'll start with my conversation with a talk about why we still have this conversation regarding men, and why do we have this conversation regarding males, and why do we have this conversation regarding men. And I think what comes out very strongly for me is that this conversation has been inspired by what I have seen and what the Lord has placed on my heart regarding the difference between being a man and doing whatever you can do as a man. On the one hand, you're a male, that is it's really about genetics. You have the male spermatozoa and what it decides for you to do, vis-a-vis being a man, and taking responsibility, taking action for the things that you do, and ensuring that whatever it is that you do is not is not without thought, without processing, among other things. So there is manhood, and then there is maleness. Maleness, I see it as a biological state, whereas manhood is more than just biology. It's about taking responsibility, and so on and so forth. And so these conversations have been going on for a while now. I thank those people who've attended, those who have followed, and those who've given their advice in this season, and shared their experiences, their stories, and have asked for more clarification on some of these issues. And I know mothers and daughters and our sisters are very interested in knowing, hey, what is going on? Why do men behave the way they do? We've listened to different people, and would like to understand better so that we know how best we can speak to men, help men, support men, and also men need to realize that there is work out there for us to do. There is a special call that the Lord God has given us, and that society generally expects from us. And so these conversations continue. Last week, I shared on my experience regarding how men relate to God, and why it's important for us always to understand that men may not necessarily relate to God in the same way as women do, and therefore we must always take into consideration those unique experiences. And I shared from my position as a father, and I tried to explain how being a father has helped me appreciate and understand how God relates to us in ways that I probably was not able to before I became a father, as well as being able to understand the limitations that men often have when they are relating to their children, and among other things. And so I know that oftentimes we have been very critical of the male species, because of course they've not done what is right. Okay, but we are now taking on the mantle to ensure that we address some of these loopholes that we see, and my mission is to see that young men especially, begin to take on the responsibility that they have in this world. Okay, now today I would like to talk about how we can navigate through the VUCA world, and I'm going to be sharing my inspirations from General McChrystal's book, Team of Teams. So first of all, those who have not yet Googled this acronym, what is VUCA? So those who've spoken about VUCA have said that the VUCA world is a world that is volatile, it's uncertain, C is for complex, and A is ambiguous. Volatile, uncertain, complex, and ambiguous. At the time that I wrote this, I wrote a book last year, and the book was entitled "We Don't Teach That at the University." And at the time I wrote that book, and I was engaging with this concept of the VUCA world, and I give credit to my friend, my dear friend, Dr. Sabiti Olive, who helped me appreciate this VUCA world much better. At the time I wrote about it, and I was talking about the world being volatile, the world being uncertain, the world being complex, and the world being ambiguous. I hadn't grasped the gravity of what I was talking about. I mean, I felt it in my head, but it is one thing to have head knowledge, and it's another thing to understand it when you go through it. And being in the COVID-19 lockdown situation has opened up my eyes to see what we mean by volatility, to see what we mean by uncertainty, to see what we mean by complexity, to see what we mean by ambiguity. Volatile, something that is volatile means something that is liable to change rapidly and unpredictably, especially for the worse. It changes rapidly, it changes unpredictably, and especially oftentimes for the worse. And when you even look at the word uncertain, uncertainty means you're not sure. You're not sure what is going to happen. It is it's not, you cannot rely on things as they are supposed to be. They are not known, they are not definite. And when we talk about complexity, or something being complex. We are talking about something that is complicated, it's intricate, it's not easy to understand or even to deal with. And lastly, when we are dealing with the word ambiguous, it is something that is not, we are not sure of. It is open to more than one interpretation. It doesn't have an obvious meaning. So in essence, the VUCA world is viewed as a world which is changing rapidly and unpredictably. It is a world which is cannot be relied on. It's a world which is complicated, intricate, hard to understand, and even to make it worse, it is very difficult to interpret exactly what is going on. The meaning is not obvious. All right. So the world is complex, the world is volatile, so harder to predict, harder to discern. Now, when I was writing my book, we do not teach that at the university. I tried to trace the volatility, the uncertainty, the complexity, and the ambiguity through the eyes of the Industrial Revolution. Starting with the first Industrial Revolution that used water, steam, power to mechanize, and then goes on to the second revolution, Industrial Revolution, that used electrical energy power to create mass production. The third, which used electronics and information technology, and now the fourth Industrial Revolution, which is building on the third, and this is the digital revolution that has been occurring since the middle of the last century. It's a fusion of technologies. The lines have been blurred between what is physical, what is digital, what is biological, etc., etc. And with that in mind, I would like to quote what Klaus Schwab says about the fourth Industrial Revolution. He said that there are three reasons why today's transformations represent not merely a prolongation of the third Industrial Revolution, but rather the arrival of a fourth and distinct one. This one has velocity, scope, and systems impact. The speed of current breakthroughs has no historical precedent when compared with the previous industrial revolutions. The fourth is evolving at an exponential rather than linear pace. Moreover, it is disrupting almost every industry in every country, and the breadth and depth of these changes herald the transformation of entire systems of production, management, and governance. So you can see the fourth industrial revolution has come and is changing everything. By the end of last year, we were talking about cryptocurrencies. We had not yet even appreciated what cryptocurrencies were, but then you have COVID, and COVID changes everything altogether. Now, it's on the background of this book that I wrote, that in there I started discussing and analyzing the work of General McChrystal. Now, General McChrystal writes a book called Team of Teams. In that book, Team of Teams, McChrystal, maybe to have a little bit of background to who General McChrystal is. General McChrystal was at the helm of the fight against Al-Qaeda. He was at the helm of the fight against Al-Qaeda, and during the Iraq War, there was what they called the Joint Special Forces Task Force. And what they were actually doing in that Joint Special Forces Task Force, they were fighting against something that they had never fought before, and they had not yet realized it. You remember at the time when George Bush Jr. Declared war on Saddam Hussein, he said it will be shock and awe. We will get in there, kick out Saddam Hussein, and then we will be out. We'll have changed it. It will be like, we have a superior fighting force, and we shall be able to do it so quickly, and we'll be out, and the change that we want to happen will happen with the click of our finger, just like some of you who watch some of those Marvel comics, and the clicking of the finger. That is a detail that I do not want to go into, lest we get carried away in there. Now, McChrystal noted that the enemy they were dealing with was totally different. You see, the armed forces, at least up to that stage, were used to some kind of linear organization. You have a general who knows everything and tells everyone what to do. All right. But McChrystal realized that they had to move away from traditional, secretive, siloed military hierarchies of having a general or a field marshal that sends commands down the authority or the leadership line. It was not enough that you had a superior force or that you were an efficient force. No, because when they got into Iraq, and as many of you may know, they ended up staying in Iraq for a very long time because they found that the enemy was not the enemy, that the enemy kept changing faces. The enemy kept changing faces. The enemy kept changing tactics. It was more than just even guerrilla warfare, Today the enemy is one thing, tomorrow the enemy is another thing. And so McChrystal says that he realized that one had to adopt. He realized that there was need for resilient adaptation to the changing circumstances. Or in other words, need for sustained organizational adaptability. Worrell is someone who wrote in Forbes. She argued that your ability to adapt to change and proactively make changes in your career is what will make a crucial difference to where you find yourself even just 5 years from now. She quotes Charles Darwin, and Charles Darwin, and he wrote the book, The Origin of Species. We have different views about what interpretation you can get from Charles Darwin's book. Some have said there is no God, but that's a conversation you can have another day. But Charles Darwin says it's not the strongest of the species that survives, nor the most intelligent. It is the one that is most adaptable to change. It's the one that is most adaptable to change. Now, with that in mind, I'll take you back to General McChrystal's book. McChrystal borrows from Homer's Odyssey. Now, Homer was a Greek poet who wrote this amazing book called the Odyssey. And Homer talks about a god called Proteus or Proteus. That god was always referred to as a shape shifter, meaning that today it's a laptop, tomorrow it's a mobile phone, the other day it's a book, and so on and so forth. Now, specifically in Homer's Odyssey, he talks about how the Greeks had to engage with this interesting shape shifter, and says, and I will quote, "But the Greeks clung firmly to this enemy. Their normal weapons were of little use. With each shift of the Proteus, they shifted. With each new challenge, they changed, clenching their legs tight around the necks of animals that appeared, or digging their fingers into the wooden limbs of trees, or wrapping their arms around swirling balls of mercurial fire." Sorry about that. I got someone tried to call me. "The old man of the sea was defeated. By adapting, the Greeks found their way home. Now, the Odyssey is a very interesting journey of the Greeks, how they moved on from one challenge to another until they meet this Proteus, who is very unique, and they had a lot of difficulty fighting this Greek. This Greek god. Of course, it is a fictitious one, but you get the story behind it. Heraclitus, a Greek philosopher, is quoted as having said, "Change is the only constant thing in life." Change is the only constant thing in life. And I think the ladies who are listening to me and who will probably listen later on can agree that change is the only constant thing in life. Our mothers used to have a hairstyle called wet look. Before then, at some time, you now have the braids, then you have the Janet cut, there is always change in the fashion world. And maybe we need to pick more lessons from the fashion world than we actually do. Look at our fashion designs. Today we are wearing bell bottoms. Tomorrow we are wearing something different. Then it is tight-fitting trousers. Then it's a different thing. I'm beginning to see that more and more of us men are now growing our hair, which we used not to do, which we used to shun. At some point it was the in thing to have a beard, and then at some point it was seen as being dirty, and so on and so on. So things keep on changing. Now it's with that background that I would like to begin to speak to us as men. In light of the fact that the world is volatile, the world is uncertain, the world is complex, the world is ambiguous, what then do we have to do? How do we manage in these circumstances? And in his book, General McChrystal has already given us some insights. He is challenging us, and he shares his experience, saying that the task force that he was leading had to unlearn a lot of things. It had to tear down familiar organizational structures and rebuild them along completely different lines. And the question to us as men, or whoever is listening to me, is, what are those things we need to unlearn? What are those things we need to tear down, which have become familiar to us? And what do we need to rebuild, and rebuild along completely different lines? The world is changing, and it's changing so fast, and we cannot ignore the change that we now have regarding COVID-19. Who knew that meetings would be held on Skype, on Zoom, and on all these other spaces, and it would be okay? Who knew that classes would be handled on Google Classroom, and even reports generated as a result of that? Things have changed. Like the HIV virus, and how it became like if you remember in your biology, there was something called the amoeba that kept on shifting shape. There's been a new environment in which we too must change. Actually, in this book of mine that I wrote, I talked about I talked about bacteria, and the song that has been sung by Pompey, like bacteria. Pompey is talking about taking over society and so on. But for bacteria to survive, bacteria has to continuously adopt. It has to continuously adopt. Adaptability is so key. Adaptability is so key in this regard. And I'll give you a few examples. When you read the book, when you read about King David, King David, at some point in time when he was being hunted down by Saul, he had to adopt. He ran and hid he ran to the enemy and hid with the Philistines. And when he realized that the Philistines were planning to kill him, he adopted, and in order to survive, he took on the identity of a madman. He took on the identity of a madman. And so when they saw that David was a madman, they shunned him, laughed at him. He let saliva drip from his mouth, and in so doing, he was able to live in a different. He was able to live with his enemies, and also survive the onslaught by King Saul in that regard. There is an old movie which and I know some of you who are my students, you'll start laughing at me, because I always use examples of movies because they tend to speak in to us in many ways. In this movie called Terminator, I think one of the series, Arnold Schwarzenegger is trying to confront this unique being that cannot easily die when shot at, and he falls into bog. And when he falls into bog is mud, like slimy stuff, and then he realizes that this thing cannot see him when he has smeared his body with this bog, with this soil and water mixture, and therefore he adopts a new identity in order to survive. And this is the same thing I'd like to challenge us today. First of all, as men, but also as human beings in society today. Are we able to adapt? Are we able to adapt? Because we cannot survive without adapting to the new realities of our times. Now, let me speak to men specifically, because that's where my heart is right now. And I know, like the Baganda have a saying to the effect that as you're speaking to those who are upstairs, the ones who are downstairs are also listening. Now, my experience has been that as men, we have moved a lot from the traditional versions or the cultural versions that we've had of who men are and how men are supposed to be. You know, even when you look at the movies, just look at the movies of James Bond alone. You know, there was a time when James Bond was represented as this macho man who used to mistreat women and so on, and the women were always viewed as these vulnerable women who need a savior, a knight in shining armor, to now having men who are co-workers, co-partners with women, and the women taking on a more proactive role to fight off the enemies and to meet the challenges as equally as men do. So in the same regard, my brothers and my sisters who are listening in, we need to adopt. We need to adopt. It is no longer business as usual. You've probably heard of words such as the new normal and so on and so forth. I can only tell you this, that the only constant thing that I know, or the only constant person that I know, has been God. And I'll talk about that shortly. For now, what comes out strongly for me is that because we are living in this VUCA world where things are uncertain, where things are unclear, where things are ambiguous, where what you thought was X is no longer X but is Y, we then need, first of all, as men, to learn, unlearn, and relearn. Learn, unlearn, and relearn. What do I mean by learn, unlearn, and relearn? First of all, there are things we were taught. Okay, I remember when I was getting married and being prepared for marriage, the assumption I had at that time from the examples that I saw was that men are always provided for. Men are taken care of. And I had seen how my mother had looked after my dad, how she had waited up for him in the evening to come for a meal and prepared the meal for him, and so on. But then I'd also been able to see my life outside Uganda when I was pursuing further studies, and I realized that those roles, those things have changed. We have therefore to relearn what the society expects from us. If I was not able to cook for myself when I was abroad, then I would have had to spend a lot of money paying for my meals, because I would not have known how to cook. But because my mother had taught me how to cook, I had to adapt quickly. Away from my mother's cooking, where I was, I had to learn how to cook. All right? If I could not do that, then I would have had to pay a very heavy price in financially, and maybe a lot of burnt food to come. A lot of burnt food. So we have to unlearn those biases. All right. For those of you who, like me, are in the legal sphere, you know that there is a lot that has changed. There's a lot that has changed. The position of the woman has totally changed. In those days, under the Married Women's Property Act, women did not have a say. They could only be sued, and they could only sue under their next of kin. And I remember one of those cases involved a man who wanted to sue the bank because the bank had allowed his wife, or the bank had been, in his view, negligent in allowing his wife to forge his bank certificates. The case of Greenwood versus Martins Bank Limited, and the bank would have had to sue him in order to sue the wife. The bank had to sue the plaintiff, Greenwood, because the wife did not have what in law we call locus, or that legal personality. But that has since changed. A lot has changed. America almost got the first female president. As in, the position of the woman has changed. Therefore, even who we are as men needs to change. We need to be more supportive. We need to see women as equal partners with us. We need to we should be the ones at the forefront of fighting the bias against women. I remember when I'd gone to study, I had a long spell away in pursuing my studies, and the church I used to go to, and it's an amazing church. I'll tell you more about it. I know my brother Nino also goes to that church. In the beginning, the church did not accept women to preach and to lead. But by the time I went back for my graduation, that is about a few years later, I realized things had totally changed. The person who preached that day was a lady, and so on. So men, churches, everyone need to unlearn and then relearn. We need to relearn our responsibilities as men. In those days, when my father, I've even written about this in my blogs, or there is a book of poetry that I'm trying to compile, and hopefully it shall be published soon. I write a poem called That Cough. That cough is about how my dad used to announce his presence. My father would just simply cough. Actually, not even cough. He would just clear his throat, and would all know that daddy has arrived. And those who wanted to meet him would straighten up their shirts and go ahead to open the door, aka me. And then those who did not want would disappear into their bedrooms. We still loved our father. May his soul rest in peace. But that role of a father has totally changed. The lockdown that we've had for about 55 days has placed me in constant presence of my children. I've actually just disciplined my daughter a few minutes ago because of something that she was doing which I did not find appropriate. And I talked about this last week. The role of the father as the ever-present dad has changed. Jovet, this is you can listen in. Do not worry, please. You're welcome. It is not only for men, because it's for men and the women who love them. Hallelujah. Who love them, or who will love them in due process. So you're welcome. So I was saying that the role of the father, the role of the man has totally changed in society today, and we need to be cognizant of that fact, and therefore we need to continuously unlearn those things that we thought were useless, and learn that, for example, some of those biases, only men eat chicken, only men can lead, only men can lead, and so on and so forth. No, that cannot happen anymore. Alvin Toffler writes, he says, you must unlearn what you have been programmed to believe since birth. That software no longer serves you if you want to live in a world where all things are possible. No, that quote is by Jacqueline Purcell. It is Alvin Toffler says the illiterate of the 21st century, will not be those who cannot read and write, but those who cannot learn, unlearn, and relearn. I'll say it again. The illiterate of the 21st century will not be those who cannot read and write, but those who cannot learn, unlearn, and relearn. So we are in a constant move of learning new things every day. The things I'm sharing with you, I learned just last year, towards the end of last year, is when I engaged with the VUCA world, is when I engaged with General McChrystal's book, among other things. So we are in that constant path. Now, men as leaders, and mark me, I'm not saying women are not leaders, I'm saying men who must take responsibility, men as leaders must always be on the path of improvement for themselves and for the others. A true leader must be ready to learn and unlearn when required. My son had this, because he's the only boy amongst 4 kids. He had all this thing of feeling that he's the privileged one. He's always the one who, because he's a boy, he should be treated differently. And I heard him say this to his sisters oftentimes, and I'm sure he had learned this from somewhere else. But I've been in a process of helping him unlearn that and realize that his sisters are as privileged as he is, and are able to do certain things in the same way that he can do, and if not, may even be able to do them much better. So what are those things that we as men have been taught, and how do we unlearn them? Unlearning, Thomas Kahn says, is a process that shows people they should no longer rely on their current beliefs and methods, because current beliefs and methods shape perceptions. They blind people to some potential interpretations of the evidence. As long as current beliefs and methods seem to produce reasonable results, people do not discard their current beliefs and methods. However, if you refuse to discard some of your current beliefs and methods, you end up hitting a brick wall. Now let's look at the example that we have right now of COVID-19. I'll use the easiest one for me, which is about the courtroom experience. Before COVID-19 happened and the lockdown, Buganda Road Court had started doing what we call online court. So the people applying for bail would stay in the prison in a special room designed with a television set and the connections and wireless and so on, and then the court would proceed without them having to traverse from Luzira to Buganda Road. Now that is becoming a reality each and every day. Who knew that judges would one time pass judgments and share them with us on Facebook, WhatsApp, and email? No. Those days you had to wait for when the judge had adequate time to be able to do so. Who knew that a time would come when men would not be the only providers in the home? When women might even earn much more than the men who married them. Now, am I promoting that men should sit back? No. What I'm saying is that we must be able to adapt. I remember when I was pursuing my doctoral studies, there's a couple that came from the USA. The man had to stay home for a while the woman settled in. And then after some time she had settled in and so on, then they moved back to the capital city where the man had been able to get a job to sustain the family. That kind of flexibility is very important. It's very key. And it prepares you. Some of you know my story. My father was the provider at home. Of course, he used to earn much more than my mom. But then my father fell ill. He was battling with cancer, and at some point he could no longer work. He had to be bedridden, and my mom had to step into the role. But it needed my father to provide that enabling environment. That enabling environment. So men, we need to navigate through the VUCA world by always changing. When things change, you change. When things change, you change. I'll give you another example. For almost 4 or 5 years, I was not in the country. I was studying. My wife was in charge. Yes, I would send her the support and so on, but the physical presence, I did not have that physical presence. Now I come back home, my wife gets another job, and she has to go. She left the country also for about 4 or 5 years, and I had to be the one. Now I know some men will say, no, how do you allow a woman to go away? But I need to support her to achieve her fullest potential as well. And in any case, the money was also good. I would be stupid not to navigate, and insist. We have to move through that maze, and we thank God that right now we are together. What then is relearning? Relearning means to learn something previously known again. Pochi Wu argues that relearning can be more accurately described as refocused learning. He argues that if the focus, assumptions, objectives, and methods remain the same, then we end up learning this with the same lessons. But if we are determined to ask more questions, if we are determined to be exposed to a different way in which things are supposed to be done, if we are determined to take on new challenges, if we are determined to see things anew each and every time and are forced to do so. I'm attending a school somewhere. It's an online school now that COVID has come, and we are being given 2 texts. Sometimes they are just 3, 4, 5 sentences, and we are being challenged to ask 30 questions out of 4, 5 sentences. If you do not allow to be helped, if you do not allow to put yourself in that position of learning how to do it, you cannot do it. But once you accept to see things in a different line, then you can start. You can be able to do the assignment, and you can be able to see the secrets in those texts, which ideally you would not have seen if you had insisted on not doing so. Learning also means that we have to read more books. I've realized that the more we read books, the more our minds become unclogged, or the more our minds stop being rigid. Because when you open a book, we're able to say, hey, by the way, this is an angle that I had not realized. This is an angle I had not seen. For example, when I read Team of Teams by General McChrystal, I was able to say, oh, Wow, you mean the army moved away from the hierarchical type of leadership, whereby the field marshal knows everything, to adopting what they called teams or team of teams, whereby every team is as important as the next team. No one team is better than the others. And he gives a very vivid example. He shares with us a situation whereby, I think before 9/11 or one of those situations that happened, I think it was 9/11. Yes, 9/11, the war was in Iraq. Was it 9/11 or it was something else? I will find the detail. It was one of the bombings that had happened, or an attempted bombing that had happened. And you know, the different teams on security and intelligence were not speaking to each other. So one team gets information and sits on that information. And when it sits on that information, the other team, which would have maybe reacted, which would have done something about it, could not do something about it, because everyone was trying to pull rank. Everyone was trying to be more efficient than the other. And as a result, America suffered for that. There was loss of life. Now try and imagine. And I think it probably was 9/11. I think it was 9/11 where there was a suspicion that something was going wrong. And these organizations were either not speaking to each other or something. I'll get the detail. I think it was the current war in Syria. I think it was the current war in Syria and the emergence of the new rebellion. Just by sleeping for a few seconds, and not speaking to one another, you end up in problems. So team of teams. When you read the book, then you realize that, it's not about hierarchical leadership. It's about teams working with each other. It's about you acknowledging that other people are as useful as you are. Other people are as useful as you are, and that you need them if at all you are going to perform. You need them if at all you're going to perform. It's about having shared consciousness of the different teams, that together you can achieve the same goal together and more successfully. Now, the same lesson comes to us as men. Yes, the responsibility, I strongly believe, is on us as men. The responsibility to provide enabling environments. I was talking in, I think, the first session of Manhood versus Maleness. I was challenging some people, the young men, and saying, taking responsibility will also mean apologizing where you have gone wrong, especially if you have maybe you've broken up a relationship and you've done it wrongly. Going back to the person and saying, hey, I didn't do this very well. I made a mistake and I'm taking responsibility for that, and I'm asking you to forgive me, and I'm ready to make amends for where I have gone wrong. That is surviving, because you never know that you may need each other tomorrow. This person that you have thrown under the bus, you may need them tomorrow. They may be the people who have the adequate key or solution or connection to your next level of elevation. So it is important that we have that at the back of our minds. Learn, relearn, unlearn. Or learn, unlearn, relearn. What are those biases that you have? When Jesus came down from heaven, He had the choice to come as a mighty angel, or as God that he truly is, and to do whatever he wanted with us. We probably would all have been damned to hell and burning sulfur. But he realized that for his message to be picked, he had to adapt. So he came as a man, preached the gospel, and he realized even by preaching the gospel himself, that was not enough. When he left, he had to send the Holy Spirit to come and also help us appreciate all these things that he was talking about. And that is why the disciples finally get the idea, pick the idea. If you read the book of John, when the Holy Spirit arrives, and they're like, oh, this is what he meant, this is, and so on and so forth. And so they were able to spread and achieve the goal that Jesus had wanted in the end. Navigating through this volatile world as men also will need, apart from learning and relearning and unlearning, we'll also need to go back to what our attitudes are. What is our attitude to work? What is our attitude to relationships? We are not going to insist that things will be done the same way. Look at NSSF, for example. Yes, in the ideal world, NSSF should continue doing our savings. NSSF is the National Social Security Fund, But a situation has come which in law we call an act of God. And of course, that's a miswording. The Latin phrase is force majeure. A unique situation has come that people need, or the argument has been made that people want to use some, not all, some of their savings. Now, NSSF can either say no and lose credibility, or it can say we need to think deeply about this situation and find a win-win solution. So the attitude that we have in this VUCA world is very critical for us to see how we manage to survive and to navigate. And that is the attitude that General McChrystal in Team of Teams had to have, that instead of insisting on your hierarchical ways of leadership and continuing to make losses each and every time, they had to sit back, think, rethink, and learn. How do we work together as teams? The CIA, the FBI, the NSA, how do we create cohesion? But what attitude must we have? Let's stop treating other teams as being less than us simply because we have the finger to the atomic bomb. I think we've all seen that however much power we have, however much ammunition we have, we can have all these MiG fighters, all these missiles and all these tomahawks and so on. But in the light of COVID, we cannot use them because the enemy is unseen. Therefore, we had to adapt. We had to go into quarantine. We had to go into lockdown. We had to fight with different ways of fighting. And lastly, for this conversation on how we as men can navigate, it's not just about seeing the fluidity of our responsibility, sometimes supporting and sometimes sitting back, sometimes leading and sometimes allowing others to lead. I know there are some people who are listening in to me, and yourselves, sometimes I've told you to take leadership. And the reason I'm telling you to take leadership is that tomorrow, in case I am not here, or in case you are in a situation where you need to take leadership, you should not be without experience, and some of you have done exceedingly well in taking on leadership in those spaces where we have been. Now, the last thing I'll talk about here, and indeed there is a lot more we can talk about. I'm going to reprint the book, more copies of the book so that they can be made available. is about us developing a thick skin. Developing a thick skin. Let me quote a poem. Let me read a short poem here by Rudyard Kipling. I'm going to read a short poem here under Developing a Thick Skin, which is my chapter 7. He says, if you can keep your head when all about you are losing theirs and blaming it on you. I'll say that again. If you can keep your head when all about you are losing theirs and blaming it on you. If you can trust yourself when all men doubt you, but make allowance for their doubting too. If you can wait and not be tired of waiting or being lied about, don't deal in lies. Or being hated, don't give way to hating. And yet don't look too good, nor talk too wise. You'll be a man, my son. You'll be a man, my son. Developing a thick skin means that you need to take it. One of the things I am encouraging my son to do, he recently had an accident. I don't think it was even an accident. There's a kid from the kid outside the compound threw a stone that hit him right in the middle of right just between the eyes, right there. That kid, whoever threw it, was quite a marksman, and interestingly, it was a girl. Anyway, we forgave her and so on. So I was checking my son's wounds. I had given him first aid, and I told him, you and I, we need to learn to withhold some of the pain. We need to learn to withhold some of the pain. I'm not telling him to man up. I'm not saying pretend there is no pain. I'm saying no. Yes, there is pain, but I was encouraging him on how we can. Sometimes you have to, bite hard on your teeth and withhold the pain. In the same way, developing a thick skin means that there will always be people with different views. There will always be people who think differently from you, who say differently, and who are quite who are very critical of what you do and what you don't even do. One of for those of you who received one of my emails, I've always put at the end of it a quotation that to avoid criticism, do nothing, be nothing, say nothing, and even then you'll be criticized. So developing a thick skin means that even when you've made a certain decision, you must stick by that decision and refuse to be, you refuse that your decision to be, refuse the criticism. Well, taking the criticism, but refuse to be swayed by the criticism. Recently, one of the organizations I belong to, Uganda Christian Lawyers Fraternity, was lambasted for something that they had done by someone. Someone lambasted us on the internet, wrote an article saying many things, but also UCLF was involved, and the natural response is to set the record straight and engage with the person and so on. But no, we decided to keep quiet. Sometimes silence is golden. Yes, there is a time to speak, like Solomon says in Ecclesiastes, but there's also time for you to shut up and keep quiet. So develop a thick skin, and here I'll leave you with this concept called emotional intelligence. Emotional intelligence. Emotional intelligence has been described as the capacity to be aware of, control and express one's emotions, and to handle interpersonal relationships judiciously and emphatically. Slove and Meyer say that emotional intelligence is about being able to monitor and regulate one's own and other people's feelings, and to use feelings to guide thoughts and action. Develop a thick skin. Have emotional intelligence. When to speak out and when not to speak out. When to act and when not to act. And when you have acted, how to act. In other words, some people may even equate it to being wise. Someone wanted to give an example of wisdom, and said, wisdom is knowing when to press the button of the atomic bomb. Knowledge is being able to make the atomic bomb. Wisdom is when do you actually set off that atomic bomb. My brothers and sisters, all of you who've been listening to me, it's now 1 hour exact, 3 minutes past the hour. I should stop here. Thank you so much for listening in on how we can navigate through this VUCA world, which is volatile, uncertain, complex, and ambiguous. I recommend to you this book by General McChrystal, Team of Teams, and I hope you will enjoy it very much. If you have any question that you would like to ask, I would be more than happy to respond to it. Whether you do it now or later on this group, I will be happy to do so. Otherwise, thank you so much for joining me on this journey. I am most grateful and hope to meet you online again on Wednesday next week at 1 p.m. Thank you very much and talk soon. I don't know if there are any. No, I think there are no questions. Okay, thank you very much. If there are questions that come up, please do not hesitate to post them right here. Thank you once again. God bless. Be with you.